welcome to this deep dive. Today we're tackling, well, a really significant and sensitive issue. The future relationship between Israelis and Palestinians in the land they both call home.
Yeah, it's huge.
And to guide us, we've got a recent interview with the Israeli historian Shlomo Sand.
Yeah.
He's an emeritus professor at Tel Aviv University.
And his perspective, it's quite challenging, isn't it? Rooted in this critical look at Zionist history.
Exactly. Offers some genuinely thought-provoking ideas.
And this interview, it took place in, well, a really charged atmosphere just 3 months after October 7th.
Right. And with the conflict in Gaza ongoing.
So the central question that came up was, a difficult one. Even now, what are the possibilities for advocating an egalitarian future there in historical Palestine?
A tough question indeed. And our exploration is going to draw from Sand's recent book of People for a State, Rereading the History of Zionism.
Published by Soil.
The interview gets into some of the core arguments from that book, and that's what we really want to unpack for you today.
So the goal here, for you listening, is to try and get a deeper, maybe more nuanced understanding, looking at the history, the potential future paths.
Going beyond the sort of usual solutions we always hear about.
Exactly. We want to dig into some perhaps surprising insights, those moments that make you think, okay, without, just drowning you in information.
Okay, so let's start with that atmosphere Sand described recently in Tel Aviv. He said it was a feeling unlike anything since 1948.
Wow. Since 48.
Yeah, this deep uncertainty, a real lack of clarity about the future, really. He mentioned shock, almost hysteria.
And confusion about the war's objectives.
Yeah, exactly. A struggle to even grasp the end goal of the current conflict.
And he mentioned this sacred union idea.
He did, which is understandable maybe after such trauma.
But he also saw some troubling signs, sort of McCarthyite echoes.
Yes, affecting Arab students and professors particularly, creating this fragile environment where apparently certain terms just can't be said out loud.
Paints a picture of a society really grappling with immense pain, but maybe also limiting its ability for, open discussion because of it.
And Sand, even before October 7th, his conclusion in the book was pretty pessimistic.
It was quite bleak, wasn't it?
Yeah, he basically foresaw this almost inevitable slide towards an unequal, oppressive, binational reality, marked by violence, reprisals.
Grim stuff. But crucially, his current thinking isn't totally fatalistic, right? He acknowledges the future isn't, set in stone.
Right. He still holds out hope, it seems.
Yeah, he emphasizes he hasn't given up on a historical compromise between the two peoples, though he suggests it might only come after some kind of major upheaval.
A catastrophe, potentially.
He even draws a parallel to Herzl's original vision, that a Jewish state might arise from a major crisis. So it's a long-term view, perhaps.
A belief that even in the darkest times, shifts can happen.
Exactly. Which brings us to his view on the two-state solution. He used to support it, didn't he, for decades?
Yeah, after the '67 war. So what changed for him?
Well, he talks about his growing disillusionment, just the stagnation of that whole process.
Nothing was happening.
Right. And meanwhile, the reality on the ground was becoming this, de facto binational state.
But a very unequal one.
Deeply unequal, with conditions he describes as resembling apartheid. And he makes this point that, people on both the left and the right can get stuck in their beliefs.
They stop questioning their own side.
Yeah, fail to critically examine their own assumptions. And that lack of self-reflection, that kind of pushed him to look for other ways of thinking about it.
And that's where he found some surprising history within Zionism itself.
Exactly. He was really struck by finding these prominent early Zionist thinkers, figures like Ahad Ha'am, Martin Buber, Hannah Arendt.
Judah Magnus, too, founder of the Hebrew University.
Right, and they believed that a sustainable Jewish presence, a state, couldn't really be built without the indigenous Arab population, the pre-1948 Palestinians.
They saw coexistence as necessary from the start.
It seems so. They understood that necessity. It's fascinating because it shows Zionism wasn't just one single idea. There was this other thread, almost forgotten, prioritizing Arab consent.
Which feels incredibly relevant now.
Absolutely. Especially when you look at the demographics today.
Let's talk about that, the sheer numbers.
Okay, so you have roughly 800,000 Israeli settlers in the West Bank. That includes East Jerusalem.
800,000, that's a huge number.
It is. And then inside Israel itself, about 20% of the population is Palestinian.
So this intermingling it's already created a kind of binational state, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Just by the facts on the ground.
De facto, yes. Absolutely. But as we said, one marked by deep inequality.
Which forces that really difficult question.
Can a state with these apartheid-like conditions somehow evolve into an egalitarian one if the two-state idea is off the table?
And Sand's idea seems to be about sharing something other than just the land itself.
Yes, exactly. He talks about how dividing Jerusalem, the holy sites, it seems impossible, like needing two different victory arches in the same spot.
Right, it doesn't work.
So he proposes sharing sovereignty, not just territory. And he also stresses the need for, national satisfaction for Arab citizens within Israel, especially in places like the Galilee.
So what does shared sovereignty look like? Federation? Confederation?
Yeah, he mentions those models, things like federations or confederations, though he admits they're still a bit vaguely defined in this context.
So less drawing a line, more like sharing the keys.
Kind of, yeah. Maybe different regions having autonomy, but under some kind of joint authority, finding ways to accommodate different national identities in one shared state.
And he points other countries as examples, multinational states.
He does, yeah. It's interesting he mentions France, Belgium, Switzerland, Canada.
Spain, too. Basques, Catalans.
Right, and the UK. His point is that these places, they often had intense conflict, violence even.
But they found a way eventually.
They reached compromises. And the key takeaway isn't that everyone suddenly loved each other.
No, probably not.
It was more a cold, hard realization that endless conflict was just catastrophic, which forced a pragmatic shift. Like Northern Ireland.
Pragmatism over affection.
Exactly. And he contrasts that possibility of compromise with the horrific alternative of potential mass violence. He's careful about the court genocide regarding Gaza currently, but acknowledges how severe it is.
He also dismisses the idea of population transfer, right? Expelling Palestinians.
Very clearly. He says, look, while some on the Israeli far right, maybe even parts of the mainstream right, might dream of it.
It's not realistic.
Not at all. He argues neighboring countries like Egypt and Jordan would simply never accept it. Any regime that did would likely collapse.
So his point is, Israel is essentially stuck with the Palestinian population.
That's his assessment. There's no pushing them somewhere else.
Which leads back to that absolutely crucial factor. Palestinian consent.
You can't get around it. Sand stresses that any kind of binational arrangement, for it to work long-term, needs buy-in from both sides.
And historically, he gets why Arabs opposed it.
Totally. He says before 1948, it was understandable they'd oppose the colonization of their land. Now, he notes, support for binationalism among Israelis is low.
But among Palestinians.
He sees growing support, particularly among younger Palestinians in the West Bank, which could be a really significant shift down the line.
Interesting. It also sounds like Sand's own focus, his personal emphasis, has shifted over time.
It seems so. He talks about how fundamental human rights, civil rights, equality for both Palestinians and Israelis, that's becoming more central for him.
More important than national self-determination, maybe?
Perhaps, especially when he looks at the actions of the Israeli military in the occupied territories. He also mentions the suppression of Palestinian civil society by Israel.
Which makes dialogue even harder.
Exactly. Makes finding common ground, building trust, much more difficult.
Now, you mentioned something earlier.
Yeah.
A really surprising historical point Sand makes about Begin.
Yeah, this is fascinating. Begin, right-wing leader, came to power late 70s.
Not someone you'd associate with liberal ideas on this.
Right. But Sand points out that Begin actually advocated for a state that would grant citizenship to all Arabs within its expanded borders, Judea and Samaria included.
Citizenship, really?
Yes. And he explicitly contrasted this with, quote, Rhodesia. Sand suggests this showed a kind of liberalism within that particular right-wing tradition at that time.
That really does challenge the narrative, doesn't it? Shows how views, even on the right, have changed.
Massively. But Sand also sees a dangerous trend now, sort of overshadowing that potential. This increasing fusion of religion and nationalism, not just there, but globally. He mentions India under Modi.
He contrasts it with universalist values.
Yeah, the kind traditionally associated with the left. He acknowledges some religious Zionists in the past argued for moderation, but this current trend.
Hamas, Hezbollah, the Taliban.
He sees that mix as a huge obstacle. Those universalist ideas that could bridge divides get swamped by this potent combination of religious fervor and nationalist identity.
Which connects to Tony Judd's idea of Israel as an anachronism.
Exactly. Judd's point, which echoes those early Zionists like Arendt and Magnus, was about this ethnocentric definition of the nation.
Meaning based on ethnicity, not citizenship.
Right. defining the nation by shared descent, not shared values or residency. Sand emphasizes Israel defines itself as a Jewish state, not a republic of all its citizens.
And that creates inherent inequalities.
It has to, even for non-Jewish citizens. He gives that striking example. Children of Russian immigrants whose mothers aren't Jewish by religious law.
They get marked as non-Jewish on ID cards.
Yes, it clearly shows the tension. A state defined by religious identity in a diverse modern world.
But what about the argument that Israel needs to be a Jewish state as a refuge, especially after the Holocaust? That's a powerful argument.
It is. And Sand acknowledges his own family history, being a refugee himself, but he challenges the narrative.
How so?
He points out that historically, before the U.S. restricted immigration in the 1920s, far more European Jews went to America than to Palestine.
Driven by European anti-Semitism.
Yes. And later, limited U.S. quotas. He uses this really stark phrase that Europe essentially vomited its Jews onto the Arabs of Palestine.
Wow, that's strong language.
It is. His ultimate point, though, is that for a Jewish presence to last in the Middle East, it needs genuine coexistence. Palestinian acceptance is, for him, crucial for Israel's future security and legitimacy.
It's clear Sand holds a minority view in Israel right now. Does he talk about that?
He does. And he kind of connects it to the historical struggles of the left everywhere, fighting for universal values, human rights. He mentions Leon Blum.
But he's worried.
Yeah, he's concerned about the weakening of the left globally and the rise of these, as he calls them, backward-looking nationalist and religious myths.
And the situation in Gaza obviously weighs heavily.
Hugely. The civilian deaths, the famine. He underscores the urgent need for a ceasefire.
Does he see any way out of the current impasse? Any hope for change from within Israel?
He talks about this feeling of collective powerlessness, impotence regarding Gaza. He personally calls for a ceasefire.
But he's skeptical about mass mobilization in Israel.
He seems to be, yeah. Especially with soldiers still dying, and without a clear end goal for the war. He finds the public reaction surprisingly muted, given the death toll.
And he sees Hamas as more than just a terrorist group.
He emphasizes it's also an entrenched popular movement, which makes the idea of simply eliminating it militarily very problematic, maybe impossible. There's no clear war aim there.
But he ends on a slightly more hopeful note, or at least an interesting observation.
Yeah, it's subtle. He notes that even though Israel seems to be getting more nationalistic overall,
his core argument that there's no future for a Jewish state in the Arab Middle East without the Palestinians is apparently getting less hostile reactions than it used to.
less hostility. Why?
He thinks it might be down to the profound shock of October 7th. That maybe, just maybe, it's forcing some Israelis, perhaps subconsciously, to reevaluate some fundamental assumptions. A tiny crack, perhaps. So, wrapping this up, Sand's deep dive into history, combined with the current reality, points towards, well, some form of shared sovereignty, equal rights.
That seems to be where his analysis leads. Moving beyond the stalled two-state idea, even if the specifics are fuzzy and, the path there looks incredibly difficult, maybe even tragic.
The aha moment for you listening might be realizing these alternative ideas aren't new. They were there within Zionism from the start.
Right. And the sheer facts on the ground, the demographics, the economics might just force a radical rethink anyway, whether people like it or not.
It's definitely a heavy topic, deeply complex, emotionally charged. We hope this gives you, our listeners, some historical context to reflect on, the possibility of unconventional solutions, even in seemingly hopeless conflicts.
Yeah. And maybe a final thought to leave you with. We've seen other deeply divided societies find ways to coexist eventually. What kind of fundamental shifts in thinking might be needed on both sides here to even imagine a shared future, let alone build one?
What could actually foster that kind of shift? International pressure, changes from within those societies themselves, something to ponder.